Welcome to Stuff I Wish They Taught Me, the podcast all about learning a little bit about a lot of things. I'm your host, Alex Long, and I hope that today you get to walk away learning about something that you wish you knew a lot sooner. For more, please visit our website at thebalancedlearner.com. What's up, y'all? How many of you guys have ever heard of Michael Kittredge? If you guys have never heard about him, let me go ahead and tell you a little story about Mike. Now, when Michael Kittredge was 16 years old, he was definitely this kid who loved his mother, but he was too broke to buy her any gifts. So one day, he melted a box of crayons and he made her a candle. Now, one of his neighbors saw him and convinced him that that was actually a really good idea. So what he did was he went out to buy enough wax to make 2 candles. Of course, with one of those, he gave it to his mom, and the other, he decided to sell it. And this was the birth of Yankee Candle. Now, you're probably sitting there wondering, man, what is Alex talking about? Why is he talking about candles? And to be honest, before this whole entire quarantine and before everyone was stuck indoors and working from home, candles were nothing to me. I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes when I'm walking around Target, I'll spend the extra minute or two hanging out in the candle aisle, just opening each one and smelling all of them. I remember picking up scents like meadow showers or lavender, but personally, I love the clean linen one. That's my favorite. I always go for those. But honestly, I never even really bought them because I'm kind of cheap. And I'm like, man, this is like literally burning away money, right? You buy a candle, you're literally burning it away. But I didn't learn the importance of having something like a little candle until the pandemic, until, the COVID-19 quarantine happened. When I would be spending all this time at home and working at home, and honestly, I was stressed out a lot because I didn't know what it was a new experience to me, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to handle it. So one day, my big bro Andrew, he came over and he gave me like a really tiny candle. It was a Glade fresh linen candle, and he was like, "Bro, your room smells, man." And that was the only reason why he gave it to me. And ever since that day, every single morning, my routine was, have a cup of coffee, light a candle, start working. And not only like the smell and the aromas that the candle brought, but it brought to me like a sense of routine, like I was in control. Like no matter what was going on with either work or school or family, I knew that that candle will always be there, and it was going to definitely set the mood for a great, productive work day. And that's what today's episode is really all about. Today's episode is called Self-Care is Not Selfish. We're going to explore things related to self-care, and that's a term that I see that's been thrown around a lot during this quarantine and during this pandemic. But we're going to go into all the details, and I'm going to even provide you guys with some self-care tips. But before that, we want to make sure we understand what is the purpose of self-care, and we also have to really understand what burnout is, and we have to talk about self-compassion and all of the other many aspects of life, right, to creating a healthy and balanced lifestyle. And I know that it could sound a little intimidating, and it might even sound like a lot, but I'm here to tell you, just like Mike, every big dream, every big passion starts with a little flame. Before we start today's episode, I do want to remind you guys that I will be presenting for the Destination College Plus Foundation, hosted by the Fulfillment Fund. It's basically a virtual conference where high school students, college students, and their parents can attend to learn about different workshops and different webinars that we have set in store for you guys. If you guys are interested in checking any of those workshops out or just going out there to support me, make sure you register at fulfillment.org/destination college. That's fulfillment.org/destination college. Thanks. I want to start today's episode with a little bit about my experiences in graduate school, or even when I started my position as a college advisor. I remember we took the time to talk about self-care, and this term was new to me. And initially when I heard about it, I thought it was something cheesy, like doing yoga or standing up and doing like 10 jumping jacks to make sure that you're mentally prepared for work. And I was like, man, I don't know if I believe in this or if this is a real thing. I think people should just take scheduled breaks. And I was completely wrong. And I remember in one of my classes for my graduate studies, we actually spent an entire hour talking about self care. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, man, do I really need to learn about this? And then we started breaking down the principles like self awareness and self reflection. And I realized that some of these things I kind of knew about all along, but it's kind of nice to look at it from a perspective through education and also by having someone really talk to you about it. So I went ahead and collected all of that knowledge and all of those conversations that I had with either students or, my fellow colleagues and even my professors about what does exactly mean to practice self-care. Now, the first principle of self-care is something that we call self-awareness. Now, by definition, self-awareness is being highly observant of oneself. Now, I know we've all been in that situation where we go out and we're wondering, oh my gosh, is my shirt too wrinkly? Or, oh my God, I don't want to say something stupid. Or, is there something in my hair or something in my teeth? That is self awareness. But when it comes to self care, we want to think about it less in a physical realm, but also in a mental realm, in an emotional realm. And what do I mean by that? That could be as easy as you're sitting in class or you're having a conversation with someone and you just realize, how am I sounding today? How am I responding to these people? Is there certain facial features that are on my face that might imply something different from what I'm actually saying or thinking? And I know I'm getting very detailed here, but I just want you to understand that when we talk about self awareness, we can just really talk about knowing who you are in the moment. So, why is that important? Well, because having a good sense of self awareness leads to having a good sense of self reflection. So, what is self reflection? So, by definition, self reflection is a form of self monitoring or self regulation. So, what that means is paying attention to yourself and noticing something. And when we say monitoring it, we mean kind of either making changes or keeping up with it. And I know that sounds totally confusing, so let me give you an example. When I was working at Starbucks for a few years back in the day, I would always have to wake up really, really early in the morning. And my days would start like at 4:30 or 5 a.m. And sometimes, surprisingly, as much coffee as I would have, I would be really, really, really tired. And a form of self reflection would be on the days where I'm working in the front and I would recognize that I'm not speaking to all of the customers the same. I would recognize that to some customers, I wasn't being 100% with a smile on my face and providing good customer service. So I needed to reflect on myself and modify and change how I was acting in this situation. So I know self awareness and self reflection sound extremely similar, and it's because they go hand in hand. You can't self reflect if you're not self aware. And if you're self aware but you don't reflect on it, then you're always just going to be stuck worrying about how you are and not changing it. Now, in order to master your ability to be self aware and self reflective, you have to work on your skill of being mindful. Now, what does being mindful mean? Being mindful is basically the ability to recognize your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions in the moment. Also, it's paying attention to what's going on in the present moment. How many times have you ever talked to someone and while they're talking to you, you randomly think about, man, what's for dinner? Or, man, did I lock my car door? And then all of a sudden, they're finished with their conversation and you're looking back at them and you didn't hear a single thing they said. I used to do this all the time. Whenever I would go to a restaurant with someone and there was a TV and it was showing either a football game or a basketball game, you can forget about telling me anything important because I would be looking at that screen. And a lot of people have gotten mad at me over the years, but what they have to understand was that I was completely mindful over the game and not dedicating my attention to the person sitting in front of me. So let me go ahead and sum everything up for you guys. Self awareness and self reflection requires you to be mindful. And what does it mean to be mindful? It means to be present in the moment. This is something that happens to me a lot in my field right now. A student comes in, is talking to me about their goals, their dreams, their aspirations, and it's really easy for me to get distracted sometimes, but it's important for me to be self aware, to recognize it, to really consciously focus and tell myself, hey, this time is for this student and it's time to pay attention to their words. And boom, just like that, I'm focused again. So you're probably wondering, well, why is Alex talking about all of these things and all of these psychological terms, and why is it important to me right now? Well, it's important because before you can even understand the importance of self care, you have to understand that if you don't practice self care, what is going to happen? Most of the time, you become less self aware, you become less self reflective, and you become less mindful of the current situation. And that could be from physical fatigue, mental fatigue, emotional fatigue. The list goes on, but the point I'm trying to make here is that if you don't schedule time to take your breaks, it's going to result in something that we call burnout. Now, we all heard of the term burnout, or someone who says, I'm burnt out or I'm tired. And this is the greatest enemy to the workaholic. A lot of workaholics think that they don't get burnt out or it's impossible. And if they just keep going and going and going, everything will be fine. But eventually, everyone has their limit and everybody hits this point called burnout. And there's different types of burnout, and I'm going to go through each and every single one of them. The first one I want to talk about is physical burnout. Back in the day, I was someone who liked to work out a lot. And I'm talking like sometimes I'll work out 2 times a day, and I just really enjoyed it. Like it was a very pleasant experience for me. For those of you who don't really work out, or for those of you who do work out, sometimes people do something on one day called a PR day. And what does PR stand for? A PR stands for personal record. So what that is on that day, you will try to lift as much as you possibly can for 1, 2, or 3 reps, right? Whether that's a bench press or a barbell squat or a deadlift. And I remember I used to get so excited for these days because you get to kind of find out, well, where I am with everything. Am I making progress? Am I not working hard enough? And on this day, I remember the very first few times that I did it, I would make sure that I was pushing it and giving it my all for about a week before that day because I wanted to make sure, okay, I trained, I'm ready for this. What eventually happened was that on that PR day, I would be doing significantly horrible numbers. And what I mean by that is like maybe like 50 to 60% of what I thought I could do because I was just so physically burnt out. I was tired. I didn't have that motivation. I wasn't very strong anymore. Like physically, like my muscles were tired. I didn't give myself enough time to rest. And that happens a lot. We might not be talking about working out, but let's say you work a 9 to 5 job, or you work part time and then you also go to school at night. Sometimes those night classes get a lot harder because you're just physically exhausted from going to work. I know a lot of people who would work like an 8 to 5 and then they would have a class from 5:30 all the way to 9. That gives them literally 30 minutes to get from work to campus. They probably eat on the way when they're driving there, and by the time it's 9 o'clock, they're just completely done. Now, you might be able to do that for a little bit, but when it comes to creating a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, you want to look at what you're able to do more of in the long run. So aside from setting breaks and giving yourself enough time to kind of relax in between those major events, you want to make sure you're scheduling and planning things correctly so that you can avoid physical burnout. Another type of burnout is a mental burnout. Raise your hand right now if you've ever felt like you're just always tired, or no matter what, you lost the ability to concentrate, or you lost the ability to comprehend things, or you even lost some of your awareness and focus. I'm sure we've all been there, and this always brings me back to the person that crunches and procrastinates all of their studies. A lot of times we could definitely get away with studying a few hours before an exam, or even studying the night before an exam and expect to get good results. But what you're doing to yourself is giving yourself a mental burnout. And I've been seeing mental burnout a lot more nowadays, especially since we transitioned to a virtual setting. How many times have you ever heard of Zoom fatigue? Zoom fatigue I mean, Zoom to fatigue is a physical burnout in your eyes, but mentally, staring at a computer screen all day, man, I know a lot of us out there can relate to me right now when I say that I am tired. Definitely right now, it's like on some days I would work from 8:30 all the way to 4 and I wouldn't have any time in between, and then I'll just hop back on the computer and then I'll go to class from 4 to like 9:40 and maybe like a 10-minute break in between there. And I've been mentally burned out so many times, especially during this time of my life. But with practicing the right forms of self care, it's definitely helped me out a lot. And it's important to me because I know that when you're mentally burnt out, you want to think about how efficient is the work that you're actually doing. If you're spending 5 hours a day studying and giving yourself like a 30-minute break, and then you spend another 5 hours studying and you're just mentally tired and you're not able to actually absorb what you're reading, then honestly, what's the point of even doing that? There's a lot of different opinions and a lot of different views on this, and I'm always someone who believes that, whatever works for you obviously works for you. But I challenge you all out there to kind of think about your strategies and just add a little bit more to your self awareness and your self reflection, and be mindful that if you're mentally burnt out, what are some things that you can do to kind of prevent that from happening so that the hours that you're grinding away are actually worth the time that you put in it. You always want to work smarter, not harder. And I really mean it when I say that. Would you rather study for 3 to 4 hours and not learn anything? Or find an effective way to study for 1 to 2 hours and you'll be able to have a mindset where you're able to learn and you're not too tired and you're not distracted and you haven't lost your ability to concentrate and you're not basically wasting your time? For many of you guys who actually know me or who have listened to a few of my other episodes know that I always value heavily a routine. And my routine was always going to work. And once I get off of work, I would drive home about 30 to 40 minutes and I would listen to 89.3 KPCC, which is like the NPR, the National Public Radio, in my local area. And during March and April, when the whole quarantine was happening and the COVID numbers were going up, I remember it really got to a point where I would just be listening. I turn on my car, I'll listen for the first like 2 or 3 minutes, and it got to a point where I would just shut it off and I would just drive home in silence. And I wasn't sitting there consciously like, oh yeah, I'm gonna drive home with absolutely nothing, no music on. I actually didn't even realize that I was just starting to just drive home in complete silence. And it was kind of therapeutic for me, but I didn't know it at the time. But I think what was happening was I was going through something we call emotional burnout. It started getting a little bit difficult for me to do what I was normally accustomed to doing when I got home, which was working on other things. And it was getting difficult for me to kind of really, really, really care about the individual situations of my students, the overall situation of my workplace. I was just kind of finding it difficult to find that compassion that I once had and that was once so strong because of everything else that's been going on and, constantly hearing it in the news and whatnot. Now, emotional burnout is close to mental burnout. Some even might say it's a type of mental burnout. But this is specifically talking about when you lose your drive or you lose compassion for others and yourself, or even a loss of motivation. And sometimes you experience a lot of anxiety, and some people even result in like a mental breakdown. Emotional burnout is super common in the field of counseling, which is what I'm studying, but it's also extremely common in many other fields. But when it comes to emotional burnout, I definitely want to mention the experiences of a lot of my students. Now, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and everyone was quarantined and we all went virtual, I had a lot of students who thought about that a lot and they completely just lost their motivation to go into like the 4-year universities that they spent so much of their life working towards. And they let that change their career path and they stopped caring about school and their grades dropped and they experienced a lot of anxiety. And that is a type of emotional burnout right there. You see, they spent 100% of their time worrying about what's going to happen in the next few months. And honestly, I don't blame them. But maybe practicing a little bit of self-care during that time would have helped them out a lot. To wrap it all up, I know that all of us have been somewhere on this scale when it comes to burnout, whether it's physical, mental, emotional. I understand, and we've all been there, but the one word that I've been using consistently as I describe all these is the word loss. Now, whether you're going to school or working your job or just doing you, I can guarantee that we all do what we're doing because we want to gain, not because we want to lose, or not because we want to lose, excuse my grammar. So, what I'm just trying to say to you is that, trust me, self care is so important because if you don't practice it, this is what's going to happen. You're going to burn out and you're going to start losing. Now, when I first started learning about self care, as I mentioned before, I used to think I would have to do something cheesy like step out of the office and sit on the grass and do some namaste, some yoga or something. But I was so wrong. I didn't even know that I was already practicing self care before I even learned about self care. But I want to go ahead and start talking about a little bit about the myths and the perceptions about self care that are completely false. The first myth is that self care is selfish. Okay, that's the most common one. A lot of people are afraid to take literally 5 or 10 minute breaks from whatever they're doing because they feel like that time is taken away from their other commitments. But you have to commit that time in yourself because if you don't commit time to yourself, you're actually doing a disservice to others. This is extremely apparent in the field of counseling, but also to students. I've seen so many students who are afraid if I take 10 to 15 minutes break from studying, that's 10 or 15 minutes of knowledge that I could have been gaining. But you have to understand that that is completely false because it needs to be universally understood that if you want to take care of others, you have to take care of yourself. And that's extremely important because don't get trapped in this idea that you're being selfish by taking time for yourself because you have to look at the bigger picture. Kind of like what I said earlier. If you're not going to take 10 to 15 minutes to yourself and work for 3 straight hours, well, how effective are those 3 straight hours? And I totally understand how these people feel. Like when I just started my job, I used to skip my lunches because that was time that I could have been giving to a student. But what I noticed when I did that, I would be so tired and so burnt out that the second half of my day, I was just kind of an autopilot and I was just completely tired. And by the time I got home, I wasn't able to take care of my other commitments. And I really realized that it's really important to schedule these breaks throughout your day. The second myth is something that I brought up a little bit earlier, and that self care is super cheesy. Now, when I say self care, most people think that you have to like sit and meditate or light up some candles or do some deep breathing. And although those are all really great self care strategies, it doesn't have to always be like that. Self care could literally mean just going out, stepping away from your workspace, going on a walk, taking your dogs out, watering the grass. I don't know, do whatever you have to do to get your mind off of what you've been spending so many hours thinking about. A lot of people think that self care has to be something special, but I'm here to tell you that all you have to really do is just do something you enjoy. So, personally, a lot of my self care, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a 25-year-old guy. I still play Call of Duty. So, after a long day of work, if I know I still gotta do some homework or whatever, I'll schedule in 1 or 2 hours to go out in the Gulag and Verdansk. If you guys can understand that reference, drop a comment because I want to talk to you guys. But other than that, self care doesn't have to be cheesy. It could be as something as simple as, hey, I'm going to take 3 deep breaths, or hey, I'm going to watch this 5 minute YouTube video, or I'm going to scroll on Instagram for a few minutes. And you know, that's the beauty of self care, that it's completely personable and you can make it however you want to make it. Let me know if this has ever been you. You finish a long day, you drive home, and you get to your driveway or in front of your house and you park there and you're ready to leave and get out of the car and go into your home, but you just sit there. Whether you're looking at your phone or you're just laying down for a second, you just sit there and it might be quiet and you just have your own space. That in itself is a form of self-care. I've done that many times. I know a lot of people who do that and they might not be consciously doing it, but they're actually just taking a little break from everything before they step into their home and have to take care of all of their other responsibilities. But now that we finished talking about burnout and we cleared up a few of the myths about self-care, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about some of the tips I have for you guys when it comes to actually creating an effective self-care strategy. Tip number 1, schedule your self-care. Now, some people like to work out of a planner or a calendar, and that's great. Some people don't. Whatever you are, whoever you are, just make sure that you're consciously taking the time to schedule in your breaks. And that doesn't only mean like your 30 or 1 hour lunch break. It really means like, hey, for every hour of work I'm going to do, I'm just going to step away for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And that's really important because if you schedule your self care, like actively do that, then you will actively take the steps needed to practice the self care. Step number 2 is a big one. Make sure your self care isn't related to school or work. Sometimes I've met people who say, well, reading these chapters on history is actually a form of self care because I enjoy history. Well, that's totally fine and that's great, but don't consider that self care if you're actually studying for that history test. I know sometimes we can trick ourselves into thinking, well, self care to me is helping as many students as I possibly can. Like, that's my self care. I see that a lot in the advising world, but in reality, that's actually not self care because it has to do with the actual work that you're doing. So, step number 2 is make sure that it's separate from your work or school. Step number 3 is not to overdo it and not to indulge. Let's say your self care is watching a 5 to 10 minute video. That's totally fine. And that's actually very common, right? Stepping away, watching something you enjoy on YouTube for a little bit for a break. That's great. Make sure you don't commit to watching a 15-minute video and then it turns into you finishing the whole entire Game of Thrones series. It's easy for us to kind of fall in this trap and say that, hey, I'm practicing self-care, but it's important that self-care is very short and it's not something where it takes up the whole day because ultimately you could feel bad about yourself for doing that and you might not want to take any more self-care breaks, which you shouldn't if they're going to be that long. Now, step 3 is extremely important and it's to not practice self-care in a shallow or superficial manner. Don't consciously schedule self-care and tell yourself that you're just doing this because you have to and you don't enjoy it. I know we've all fallen victim to doing something kind of half-minded and we end up feeling like we just wasted our time. Now, self-care cannot be treated that way because self-care is extremely critical that you practice it with intention. It might be easy to say, oh, you know what, my self-care is to go outside for a little bit, and you end up going outside and you stand there for a minute and you're like, man, this is lame, and then you go back inside and it just becomes a negative experience. Or don't think that, oh, this is so cheesy. Why am I doing this? And having these negative thoughts while you're practicing self care kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? You want to do something that you enjoy. I know it's hard, but sometimes you have to literally remind yourself that you're taking a break from all the other things. So don't spend your self care time constantly thinking about work or school or whatever you're doing. Now that we have some tips relating to self care, I do want to go ahead and provide you guys with a few self care examples and some of the most common ones. One of the most common self care tips is sleep. Efficient sleep quality is so important to the full functioning of you in a healthy environment. A lot of times, one of the most common problems in students or in workers is that they're sleep deprived. So don't spend your whole entire night looking at your cell phone or watching a Netflix series till 3 a.m. and expect to be able to be fully functioning in class or working the next day at 8 a.m. If there's anything you should be prioritizing, it should definitely be your sleep. Some people like to fit in little naps throughout the day. Like for me, sometimes I know that I would get off of work around 4, so what I would do is I'll go in maybe 30 minutes early so that I could get off at 3:30 and I could schedule in like a 20-minute nap so that I could power through another 6 hours of school. And that strategy has actually helped me out a lot when it comes to making sure that I'm able to retain all the information and get the most out of my class sessions. Another self-care tip is exercise. This is something that's extremely important in my life and has helped me kind of maintain not only like physical fitness but mental discipline. Exercise is extremely important because when you do physical activity, and that could even go from lifting weights to going on a brisk walk or going on a jog, all of these things release these chemicals in your brain that ultimately, for just to break it down basically, just make you feel good. There's actually a lot of studies that show that exercise actually produces more efficient study sessions. And there's actually a great episode by Sean Stevenson. He's the host of the Model Health Show, one of the podcasts that I listen to, where he talks about all of the different learning and cognitive benefits when you connect your mind, your brain, and exercise. So I'll drop that in the show notes if you want to go ahead and give that a listen. But exercise is a really great form of self-care. Whether that's waking up early in the morning to do that or scheduling it out throughout your day. And remember, that could be as easy as a 10-minute walk or a full 1 to 2 hour gym session. The next self-care tip that I would highly recommend is meditation. Now, I know we've heard meditation be thrown around a lot, especially during the COVID-19 era, but Meditation is so important and it's an important skill to practice. Notice that I said it's a skill. The first few times that I tried it, I was like, oh man, like what is this? I'm sitting here, I'm deep breathing, I'm listening to this really calming person on my headphones. But after a while, it kind of teaches you to kind of look at things differently and it really changes your emotions. I can't count how many times that I was either upset about something or really stressed out about work, but after like 5 to 10 minutes of just breathing and concentrating and meditation, I was like a whole different person. And even within those 5 or 10 minutes, I was able to kind of look at the whole situation differently and create better outcomes. A few of my favorite apps include Headspace and Calm. These are two apps that are free. Now they do have paid versions that give you a lot more features and things like that, but you would be totally fine with the free version. And if you really want to, you could also go on YouTube and find a lot of great resources like that. But it's a really, really great way to kind of control how you're feeling and kind of recognize how you're thinking about things. And overall, meditation is a practice that I use throughout in my daily life, and it even helps me get to sleep sometimes. The next thing I want to say is definitely talking to people. A lot of times you could find self-care in talking with others, and that could be your friends, that could be your family members, that could be your colleagues, your classmates. It goes a long way when you just schedule, like 5 minutes after every hour of work just to check in on someone. Hey, how you doing? I remember when the whole pandemic started and everyone was working from home, one of my coworkers hit me up and she said, hey, do you have a minute to talk? And I was like, oh, shoot, what did I do this time? I'm in trouble. Anyway, we got on a video conference together and literally she was just like, hey, I just wanted to see how you're doing. I just want to check in with your mental health. And that went such a long way with me. And I think, if you're listening to this, you know who you are. And, that really inspired me to spend the next day, like every single day. I was like, I'm going to reach out to someone that I haven't talked to in a while, or someone at my job that I don't really talk to. And I just want to just check in with them. And in a way, just communicating with them and talking to them a bit really helped me out in my, like that was self-care to me, right? And that perfectly leads into the next and final tip when it comes to self-care. Do something you enjoy and use that as an incentive. For me, when I'm recording this during this time, it's playoffs time. It's NBA basketball playoffs time, and I'm excited. You can hear it in my voice. I love basketball. And what I do is when I need to get a lot of stuff done, I'll be like, okay, if I get all this done, I'm going to watch this game tonight, or I'm going to watch 1/4 of this game tonight. And by the time I get to that time where the game is going on and I finished all my stuff and I'm watching the game, like I'm tired, but I'm excited because I'm like, you know what? I earned this last quarter of me being able to watch this basketball game. And that reward incentive feeling goes such a long way. And that might sound a little weird, right? But just hear me out. Like another example is how I would play with my dogs. Like I love my dogs. I have a Boston Terrier and I have a Chow Chow. But sometimes when I have a long day of work, I'm just like, all right, I'm going to take this 10 or 15 minutes because I just love sitting there watching them and petting them. And that's what I do. That's my self-care, right? Spending time with my dogs and my loved ones. And ultimately, that's the best way for me to take care of myself. So all in all, today, I hope you definitely learned a lot more about self-compassion, self-awareness, being mindful, right? Learning and trying to figure out ways to navigate your time and more importantly, to take care of yourself. I can't stress and emphasize how important self-care is to you. And I hope that you guys are definitely practicing this because I'm going to say it again. How do you expect for all of these different aspects and responsibilities to be taken care of in your life if you can't take care of yourself first? Just want to remind you guys that if you really enjoyed this episode, please go on Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. If you loved it, let me know. If you hated it, let me know. Either way, I want to find out how I can get better or keep doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I've never been good at saying goodbye, but something I always say is that we say goodbye so that we could say hello again. Thank you guys so much for tuning into Stuff I Wish They Taught Me. Once again, my name is Alex Long, and remember, if you want to be a good friend, if you want to be a good homie, then go ahead and think about someone that you might feel will benefit from any of the information that I shared with you guys today. Send them the episode and let them go on their merry way. If you guys have any suggestions, please go to thebalancedlearner.com and click suggestions and let me know what you're thinking. I really want to know, I want to improve, and I want you guys to be there with me. Please, if you have a chance, leave a review or a rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcast. And it brings me a great honor for me to say this, as I always do, to close off every episode. I told you.